Kia ora, my name's Mr. Buxton and I'll be talking through how to go from an achieved and 2.3 unfamiliar text right through a merit and then finally to an excellence. So firstly, how to read unfamiliar text. The first thing we've got to do with unfamiliar text, and this is something that a lot of my students fail to do, is to actually read the title and explanatory sentence carefully. So read the extract. So for most texts, you'll have a title. It may be something like Missing the Magic, and then underneath will be an explanatory sentence. This may be something as simple as, in this poem, the author looks outside to see the moon. Or in this extract, a character goes on a journey to hunt some eels. Or there'll be some sort of explanation that gives you basically the theatre of your mind, the place where you can imagine this narrative or poem or short story or non-fiction text taking place. So make sure you read that. It establishes where it is, it establishes who's involved, and it establishes what's going to happen. Second step, read the extract from start to finish in one big meal. It has to be a sequence for you, otherwise you'll just lose yourself in the little bits. You'll play spot the simile, you'll lose the actual plot, literally lose the plot of the story. So read it out loud in your head. And by this I mean you can make your lips move as you say the words. You don't want to be in an exam reading it out loud in your head. You'll get kicked out. But as you're reading it, you're mouthing the words so that it's staying kind of linear from start to finish, from first line to second line to third line, not skipping ahead to see if you can find some language feature, not all of a sudden thinking you've got it sussed and rushing to the question. So read it out loud, take your time, make sure you get it sussed. Thirdly, this is where you read the analyze question. And you've got to break that into further questions. If the analyze question asks you to analyze how the writer establishes their perspective on adventure tourism, then you need to say, right, well, what's the writer's perspective on adventure tourism? Second, how does the writer establish this perspective? So you're breaking it apart to its natural questions. And once you do that, you've got a much clearer kind of idea when you go back and reread the question. Reread the text with those questions in mind. Finally, reread the text with those questions in mind and take notes of the language features. Right? So basically it's a fairly simple process, but you end up reading it once, twice, and then maybe a third time as you zip through looking for its language features. So it's a fairly thorough process. Okay, this is what the assessment schedule for today's text will be based on. An achievement looks at these things, merit these things, excellence at these things. We're going to look at the difference between these two and the difference between these two, and I'm going to show you some examples that I have whipped up. The text we're dealing with is called River Warrior, and so if you want to pop back and have a look at this part of the presentation or the video, you'll be able to do that because we just build up naturally from a 1 to a 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 8, adding some complexity, weaving our response together more as we get into the merit, and then finally having sort of some originality and insight over here. Alright, so River Warrior, here is the text. And this is what we get left. We get the title, River Warrior. In this extract from a novel, members of a whānau go hunting eels at night. Oh, that's my battery bailing. I'm just going to pause the video and get my battery cord. Alright, sorry about that. So in this extract from a novel, members of a whānau go hunting eels at night. So that's what you'd read through the text with understanding that. But so many students just miss this bit. They just go straight into the text. And they don't get it lodged in their head that A, these are members of a whānau, or B, this is what they're doing. They're hunting eels. So when it says they're eeling, they may be confused and think, oh, maybe this is a metaphor for something else. No, they're literally hunting for eels. So all of that's just really good in terms of what English teachers will call orientation. Next. Your questions. Analyse how the writer creates an atmosphere of adventure. So, as I said before, break that into further questions. What is the adventure? What are they trying to do? What obstacles do they face? So you're thinking, hey, what's the adventure taking place? And second, how does the writer show this? What I've missed in these questions, just looking at it now, is the atmosphere. How is there an atmosphere created of these things? And so those keywords become really important when we look at writing our responses. All right, read the text. I'm just zipping through this stuff. Here's the text. Very short sentences. So I've read the text, and you might want to pause this and read the text as well. And then you are going to try and respond to the text or think about the text, thinking about that atmosphere of adventure, how that gets established. So what do I notice as I read through it? Very short sentences, present tense, focus on action. Okay, so all of this is in this text. It's a bit of a random text. There's not a lot of fluffy description. So we're going to talk about that in our response. Again, very simple sentences. The first 5 sentences, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sentences are all simple sentences. There's sensory language through the text. We hear a couple of times through the text that things are cold. We feel things through the text. There's a focus on action. What else did I notice? As I went through this, there's a focus on the action. Everything moves forward at a steady pace. The short sentences aid that pace. There's this great line after Tom Aitken kills an eel. He says, I feel a buzzing in the bones of my hands because I'd really like to gaff an eel too. This idea of buzzing, the sensory language, is also metaphoric. It's not a literal buzzing, and there's this idea is kind of has connotations of the excitement, the thrill that he's feeling. River Warriors, there's a sense of strength and identity in his name when he says River Warriors don't care about water in their gumboots. And he sort of talks about kicking off his socks at this point. It's kind of quite symbolic of him stepping into a new sense of identity as somebody competent enough to take on an eel. And then finally, as it finishes, he's wading out into this deep water in the territory of the eel itself. So there's all of those things I note in terms of the atmosphere of adventure. Let's see the responses that I was able to come up with for achieved, merit, and excellence. Okay, so this is the achieved answer. In order to make this relatively short as a video, the achieved response directly addresses the essay question. I just encourage you to do that. If you go back and look at the marking criteria, you've got to get onto that question in order to score points, because that question asks you about the ideas. Okay, analyze how the writer, I think, creates an atmosphere of adventure. And so I want to get onto this idea of atmosphere of adventure as soon as possible. Now, I've deliberately made this a little waffly because this is a lot of words, and it's not necessary to write that many words, because basically what am I saying? They've written a text. Yes, they've written it carefully. They've created effects for the reader. Yes, they have, but I haven't said what the effects are. And so if I was to go more direct, I'd say writes the text carefully and creates an atmosphere of adventure for the reader. And then furthermore, you would want to talk about what these features are. And so I've talked about short sentences and sensory language. I developed short sentences here in paragraph 1, paragraph 2, sensory language, and then finally I've talked about this. Throughout, I've repeated the key words: atmosphere, adventure, atmosphere, adventure, adventure. You'll see that through that. And so repeating those key words to ensure that your answer matches the question is a really key strategy for an easy win. A mirrored answer. So I've really buffed this up and possibly gone overboard here, but I'm starting to really be particular. Short sentences are used throughout the whole text. 5 sentences of the text are simple sentences, and this immediate effect creates an atmosphere of tension. Feels like the writer is conserving words almost like they're whispering. And that level of kind of personal engagement with it is going to ensure that a marker goes, oh, okay, this text is really being felt by the author, felt by the reader. Nights here is placed on its own line and emphasises the atmosphere of darkness that shrouds the entire text. So don't be afraid to use some of your own personal writing style as you describe your responses. Another key thing is to weave your language features together. These short sentences combine well with careful use of sensory language. So that's a deliberate linking between the two. And again, I do that somewhere else. A key use of this technique is when the writer describes their excitement as a buzzing in their bones. And I've said that's a metaphor. I've also said it's sensory language. And I have explained its effect. We can imagine the jolt of adrenaline they experience. Again, by rounding off, going back to my topic, we can sense the atmosphere and the author's response through these techniques. Sweet. The final thing I analyse is the overall narrative structure. I thought this was a bit nerdy, but most of you will know this from earlier years in English, with orientational setup at the beginning, the reason or the goal of a quest for an adventure. So these are sorts of things that are typical of adventure. And even if you couldn't really remember the particular techniques, knowing that there's a physical challenge that scares the character, but he still continues to do it, and the text seems to build up in tension, those are very good things to observe. I have made it a little bit more Englishy by using techniques of genre are at play here. And yeah, I'm using that idea of overall structure to reinforce my previous points. These are all kind of words on the line type. Well, this one is sentences. These are more kind of the words being used, the diction, and this here is talking about the structure. So what am I doing? This is small, this is medium, this is large view of the text. And I'd encourage you to do those sorts of viewings. Hey, where is the text movement? Where is there a shift in tone? What paragraphs or transition marks are there in the text? Those structural observations are really handy as well for merit and excellence answers. And then my big boy, my excellence answer, starting with some sort of observation that captures something of the text. All young people go through defining moments of challenge and conquest, whether it's sport, cultural activities, schooling or other. We all look back on moments where we bravely push ourselves towards new goals. River Warrior outlines such a journey. So it's a bit waffly, but it basically looks at the thread of overall significance to this text. And I won't elaborate too much on this one. Other than to say there's a deliberate attempt to weave more techniques together. This is a fairly threadbare style of writing in this text, and so those of you playing Spot the Simile, looking for the typical figurative language techniques, you're not going to find much. And so it is important to try to kind of fall back on some of the general English skills that you know. Short sentences often convey action and movement more successfully, and so those are the sorts of things that do build into tension and an atmosphere of adventure. I have mentioned some specific stuff to do with coming of age narrative, and I have mentioned also up here that it's written in present tense to build the immediate impact of each line for the reader. And I've finally finished by going beyond the text, again by talking about rite of passage down the end there. Hopefully that's helpful for you. I'll try and finish this in under 15 minutes. Ka kite, all the best with exams. Cheers.